let's get started. I always start my webinars with a quote, and this one is a very famous one. I'm sure everybody has heard it at some point. Don't tell me the moon is shining. Show me the glint of light on broken glass. I'm going to show you some techniques today on how to do that. If you say the moon is shining, it's sort of in and out of our heads. But the memory of a glint of light on broken glass can last and create a very lasting image. So it's a really beautiful quote. And as I say, that's why it's very well known, because it is just so apt. So let's start with telling. What is telling? Telling is when the author informs the reader of information. It's usually factual, it's brief, or at least it should be, but it doesn't really stir the reader's emotions much. It's like reading a journalistic report. It's full of facts, it's maybe a bit dry, and often we don't enter into it, we don't immerse ourselves in it. Some examples of telling. It was winter. He was tall. He was angry. She was cold. He felt tired. She felt embarrassed. Now, these tell us what emotions they're experiencing, but they don't really let us enter into those emotions. It feels very superficial. You'll notice there that there's a couple of words that are common, was and felt, and we'll look at some of the words later that often represent telling in our writing. So we've looked at what telling is. What is showing? Showing, it's where you're showing a picture, you're creating a picture in the reader's head, in their imagination, rather than simply sharing information. Showing does tend to be a lot more detailed, and I'll show you examples later and you'll see how this works, and also a lot more wordy. So telling is when you have a certain word count and you need to get it very down and very tight. However, showing often boosts your word count and actually fleshes out scenes and stories. Showing is when the author allows the reader to deduce for themselves what the characters are experiencing. Now, in everyday life, we walk around and we are constantly reading people's signals. We walk down a street, we look at people's facial expressions, we look at their body movements, their gestures, and we're constantly picking up on all these little signals and decoding them. And that is what makes life so interactive. Even when we watch, for example, a movie, we're doing the same thing. We're looking at the actor's body language. We're reading clues all the time. Reading, on the other hand, sometimes isn't that, especially when we're being told something about the actors and the characters. We don't have that same involvement. Our brains aren't always working to decode. However, when we use a showing technique in our writing, we're actually giving the reader clues rather than telling them outright what the character's emotion is, etc. And this actually makes the reader then have to read into and deduce the clues from your writing, which makes it that much more of a lived experience and a much more immersive experience. Because the reader is now doing part of the work themselves, the reading experience becomes much more immersive and engaging. And this is often the difference between a page-turning book, a book that really sucks you in and that makes you feel like you've experienced the journey with the characters. It's usually because you've had to decode some of those clues and really get involved in the story.